Hello dear viewers, a very warm welcome to Opinion. I'm your host Ahmed Reza, extending hearty greetings to all of you on behalf of Jamuna Television. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a very special guest among us and who will share her valuable insights with us. So sit back and let's embark on this journey together. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are highlighting the important relationship between Australia and Bangladesh. Since establishing diplomatic ties in 1972, both countries have strengthened their collaboration and cooperation in different sectors. So I'm delighted to introduce our guest of honor, Her Excellency Nadia Simpson, Acting High Commissioner, Australian High Commission in Bangladesh. Excellency, welcome to Jamuna Television. How have you been?
I've been very well. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Excellency. And we have a lots of questions to ask to you. And at the very beginning, I would like to know from you about New Bangladesh. As we are mentioning in somewhere in different ways about our New Bangladesh. So regarding that perspective, I would like to know that with Bangladesh entering a new and the rise of Generation Z, you know, it's very familiar right now. So how do you see this demographic shaping the future of Bangladesh and Australia-Bangladesh relationship?
Thank you. Well, at the outset, I think it's important that at this point in time, we just take a moment to acknowledge those that were injured and lost their lives during the uprising in July and August. I think it's important. It's a very challenging time for Bangladesh during that period. And as you say, it's entered into a new phase of a new Bangladesh. And what does that mean for Australia-Bangladesh relations? But more importantly, what does that mean for Bangladesh in terms of how will the future be shaped through this change? I think Generation Z, I must say at the outset, it makes me feel very old. I don't know whether anyone else feels that way. But I think so. Looking at the student movement and all those that participated in the uprising, I think one thing that Generation Z, we call it Generation Z, not Generation Z, but one of the things there, I think it captures the two things that have struck me during my time in Bangladesh of 3 years, and that's both the creativity and the passion of the people of Bangladesh. And I wouldn't say that that's limited to Generation Z. I think I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to visit Dhaka University to look at the murals that people painted there, and you can see that that degree of passion and impatience for change. So how I see that shaping Australia-Bangladesh relations, and particularly the role of Generation Z. I think we already have fantastic people-to-people links between our countries. I think what we'll see now is an uptick in the pace of that exchange, an uptick in the creativity, globalization, and increasingly sort of the digital domain has meant that conversations can happen in real time. And so genuine collaboration between the people of Bangladesh, and particularly the young people of Bangladesh and the young people of Australia, is something that we very much look forward to in the future.
Yeah, of course, we are optimistic about that. And in your speech, you mentioned about a lot of things. Regarding that perspective, you know that we have many kind of challenges right now here in Bangladesh. So regarding that issues that we have, the socio-economic perspective is, as you know, which is very challenging and which is very important right now. So what do you think that how can Australia collaborate with Bangladesh regarding that perspective, especially if I talk about the socio-economic perspective here in Bangladesh?
So I think Bangladesh, like all countries in the world and in the region, is facing socio-economic challenges. I think it's something that when we look at it at any point in time, countries are facing something like this. I think in terms of what Australia can bring to assist Bangladesh at this time, I think we are a very old and dear friend of Bangladesh. We have a very deep and enduring relationship and a great deal of trust between our countries and our people. So I think one of the things to look at in terms of the socio-economic cohesion would be around looking at lessons learnt from countries like Australia around institution building, human rights and democracy are not simply something that takes place at a particular point in time. They're safeguarded by strong institutions. So looking to other countries such as Australia, of how do you develop strong institutions? How do you ensure that there is space for the media and for public debate on issues? And how do we develop how does Bangladesh move forward in terms of developing a society that embraces this? It's not just about sort of the individual grievances, but it's about structuring a society that over the longer term, supports institutions that further democracy and human rights. I think from the Australian perspective, again, just want to reiterate to the people of Bangladesh that we're here with you. We stand by the people of Bangladesh, and we also support the interim government in its objectives at this challenging time.
So you have mentioned about your partnership. As we know that Australia is very valuable partner of Bangladesh. So regarding that perspective, I just want to know from you that what kind of initiative do you have to collaborate more with Bangladesh? As you know that we are having a very challenging time right now as a state. So what perspective or what initiative do you have to collaborate with Bangladesh right now?
Yeah. So through our, we obviously have a wide-ranging relationship that covers trade, our development assistance program, people-to-people links, sporting links, a whole range of different areas. But in terms, I might use this opportunity to talk about our development assistance program to Bangladesh. So Australia's development assistance program to Bangladesh is around 32 million Australian dollars. That's to Bangladesh. We also have an additional program that covers collectively the crisis in Myanmar and in Bangladesh, the impact of the Rohingya travelling to Bangladesh and supporting the humanitarian response here in Bangladesh. So our development assistance program focuses a lot on skills development. It also works incredibly closely with BRAC. So we've been a long-standing strategic partner of BRAC. We also focus on supporting social protection, and increasingly we're looking at supporting economic reform within Bangladesh. So in terms of the assistance that we're providing, is that we'll continue to do what we're already doing, and that will be assured going forward. Over the past few weeks, you would have seen that we've been meeting with a number of the advisors in the interim government. My message to them is that we don't want to come with a package. We don't want to come and say, here, this is something that we propose for you. But we are very much open to requests for specific assistance, whether that might be in terms of providing technical advice on reforms, new programs. So of course, as with any government, there's a limit to what we can do with new programs and activities. But our message to the interim government and to the people of Bangladesh is that whatever changes take place, they have to be led by the people of Bangladesh, and we're there to assist you in that. And so we want to have that open dialogue where we can lean on each other's expertise, I think, to take things forward.
Sure enough. Thank you so much for sharing such initiative and insights with us. Thank you, Excellency. But as we mentioned before that, we are having a challenging time, and regarding that issues, we need more investor here in Bangladesh. You know how important it is. So as Bangladesh is keen about the investors, foreign investors especially, so in that perspective, how Australia can collaborate, especially what kind of offer do you have?
So even before the Gona Utputan, Australia had been focusing on enhancing our relationship in the Bay of Bengal and in Bangladesh in particular. And part of that was investing in our trade promotion arm. So the Australian government, we believe that trade and investment is best led by the private sector, and that governments create the enabling environment for that. So recently, when Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong visited Bangladesh, so that was in May, and that was the first purely bilateral visit in over 26 years. As part of that, the Australian government announced an enhanced engagement with Austrade, which is our trade promotion arm. So we've been looking at enhancing investment in Bangladesh and how to go about doing that for some time. And we've also invested in that to support linkages between Australian businesses and Bangladeshi businesses. Because if you imagine where Australia sits, so when we look westward, We have the block of the ASEAN countries, Southeast Asia, which is very important. Then you have Bangladesh, then you have India, then you have European markets. And unfortunately, or fortunately for outcomes, but unfortunately for countries such as Bangladesh, trade is competitive. So this is not something where we can simply say, Australian businesses, you need to invest in Bangladesh. When Australian business people will wake up in the morning, they'll be thinking, where is the best place for me to run my business or to invest? That competition creates really important outcomes for the economy in Bangladesh and globally and regionally. So I think on that note, I think the most significant thing that can happen to attract investment is around stability in the law and order sector within Bangladesh. Incentives go some way towards that, but at the end of the day, it is those basics of ease of doing business, a secure environment in which to operate, access to inputs such as energy, water, whatever you might need, repatriation of profits to make sure that profits legitimately made in the country can be repatriated offshore. So there's a lot of things that can be done in that sector, and I know that when I listen to the Honourable Chief Advisor and to other advisors within government, that this is a real focus for Bangladesh at this time. So we're very optimistic that moving forward, that these essential environmental conditions to encourage investment, not just from Australia but from global investors, will take place within Bangladesh and move forward.
That's exciting, of course. Thank you so much, Excellency, for sharing such insights with us. And as you know, as we talked about the investors or investment here in Bangladesh, so when you will talk about the investor or investment, so you need to have the political stability, which is much more important, you know that. So right now we have a different political movement, different political procession, or different political alignment. So how do you evaluate this situation regarding the political perspective of Bangladesh?
It's a very complex question. With a question like that, I think at the outset, the most important thing to say is that democracy is the most stable form of government. It's the most stable form of government because on periodic occasions, the people get to decide how the government's going to move forward. So that's at the outset. Democracy is what brings stability to countries. So at this current juncture, I think it would be fair to say that what we see from the Australian government looking into Bangladesh is a really strong motivation for things to be different and for things to change. So there is an incredible appetite for creating Bangladesh 2.0 or the new Bangladesh. And that is a really critical starting point. So one of the things that there's no apathy, there's no political apathy. People haven't sort of downed tools and stepped aside. People are very much politically engaged, and it's how the key actors within Bangladesh, whether it be the interim government, political parties, civil society organisations, how they come together to build this vision.
Right.
That is the crucial point, because this isn't something that's top down. It's something that in a democratic society there are multiple players that help to build consensus about going forward. And that's where one of the most critical aspects of that is the media and the freedom of media, freedom of communication, to make sure that opposing views can be aired and that people feel comfortable with disagreement in the public sphere without fear that they're going to somehow be shouted down or need to fear for things. So if we have all those elements within Bangladesh or within any society, I mean Australia is exactly the same, then that's what will help the country and help all countries move forward to stability.
Thank you so much for your insightful discussion. Thank you, Excellency. But right now we have to take a break, and we have many more questions to ask to you. So before that, I have to take a break. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just heard some fascinating insights on Bangladesh-Australia relations, but there's so much more to explore together. After the break, we'll dive deeper into the issues. Stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again. And today we have a very special guest among us, as we mentioned before. Today we have Nadia Simpson, Acting High Commissioner, Australian High Commission in Bangladesh. So welcome, Excellency, once again. And we talked about a lot of issues before the break. As we continued our discussion, so right now I would like to know about the human rights situation in Bangladesh. As we know that we had basically the international countries or international powerful countries, they had a very concern about the human rights situation in Bangladesh once upon a time. So what about your opinion or views right now, how it's going on? Are we in a right track?
Thanks for that question. Human rights are a really important part of Australia's domestic policy and foreign policy. What I'd like to do with that question is reframe it slightly, because I think you can look at a static point in time and to say what's the human rights situation in Bangladesh or Australia or anywhere else at a snapshot in time. But I think a more interesting question is to look at the strength of institutions to ensure that human rights are protected within a country, because it takes the question out of the individual cases and sort of looks at it more holistically within the society. So I think in terms of the human rights situation in Bangladesh at this point in time, what's very clear is that the interim government is committed, has said publicly around its emphasis on human rights. There are advisors that are human rights activists within the Advisory Council. Statements have been made by the Honourable Chief Advisor Muhammad Yunus around the importance of human rights in areas including ethnic and religious diversity. And so these are all really positive statements from the interim government. And I think that's something that we commend. And also in terms of the UN fact-finding mission coming to Bangladesh, that will be a really...
They're working on.
Yeah,
right now, yes.
that will be a really important document or outcome document to look at examining the human rights within Bangladesh in a particular snapshot in time. So I think human rights it's a very broad agenda. There are many different elements to human rights, and human rights are also indivisible. I'd like to touch upon one point of human rights within this, and to maybe explain a little bit about how we try and institutionalise human rights within the Australian context. So as a woman in a leadership position, I would feel that it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the role of young women in Bangladesh in the past few months. I mean, we saw young women out in the sun, in the rain, at the barricades, facing violence, protecting their friends from violence, day and night. We saw women there in a very, very public way. And I want the women of Bangladesh, young women of Bangladesh, to know we saw you. Then when you move towards the institutionalization of human rights, how do you translate the participation in this mass uprising into building institutions for human rights and building Bangladesh 2.0?
Right.
So one of the things that we focus on in the Australian context is what happens within institutions and within political parties. So there's within institutions, you can talk about being you can make talk the talk around being a great advocate for multiculturalism, for the rights of minorities, for the Sodi community, for women and others. But when you actually look at it, you can also judge an institution by how much that institution reflects the diversity that you want to see within society.
Right.
So in my own organisation, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, we have a policy which is also reflected in political parties within Australia, where they say it's the 40-40-20. And the 40-40-20 is that 40% of leadership positions should be held by men, 40% should be held by women, and 20 is either, because you're never going to get right to 50-50. So I think in terms of human rights, what I would encourage people to look at, which is what we look at in Australia, is what is the diversity within political parties. So there's a lot of talk around new political parties being created. So that's a great opportunity within new political parties to say, we're not just going to talk about human rights, we're going to make sure that a diversity of voices are included in leadership positions and decision-making positions. And also within institutions to say we want a diversity of voices included in these positions. Because I think one of the things that we often say about policy is that if policy making is easy and smooth, you're probably not speaking to the broadest range of stakeholders.
Right.
And those voices need to be valued and included within the tent of decision making and not outside. So just return to the point that in particular, sort of looking at the visibility of women, it's something that is certainly very close to my heart in particular, but also sort of the strong emphasis of the Australian government. So I wish the Bangladesh institution building, all the success in terms of institutionalizing multiple voices within decision making.
Thank you, Excellency, for sharing such inspirational insights. Of course, as I should mention, as because when you were talking about the women in leadership, and especially in our country about the youth, they should think about their power. Thank you, Excellency, for sharing such insightful insights. But I would like to know right now, about the people-to-people connectivity and people-to-people ties, because you know it's very important for both of the countries. And as I know that you have some shared vision with the students and with professionals as well. So would you mind to share with us your evaluation regarding that perspective?
The people-to-people ties. Look, I think, as I mentioned before, you know, Australia and Bangladesh have a long history, together. And we also have a lot of shared things in our history and a common love of things like cricket and sport. We also share a common official language. So I think in terms of the people-to-people ties, it's only increasing. So within Australia, estimates vary, but we have quite a sizable Bangladeshi community within Australia. And I know last year around 14,000 students from Bangladesh applied for universities in Australia. And so these people-to-people links, they help to develop a more nuanced understanding of Bangladesh as a country and the Bangladeshi people as very distinct ethnic groups or cultural groups. And I use that term deliberately because we often talk about Bengalis, but like Australia, Bangladesh is a multicultural, multi-faith country. And so I know in terms of my experience here, I was really thrilled to learn more about the diversity within Bangladesh and not just sort of the mainstream culture. So I think those people-to-people links and having those detailed conversations and engagements are increasingly important. I think we have a great formal exchange between institutions, including within our military and also across the bureaucracy. And all those are testament to the strength of the people-to-people links. But these things we can't take anything for granted. I think with those, we have to keep engaging and we have to keep learning from each other.
Indeed. Thank you so much. And now we'd like to talk about a very serious crisis like Rohingya. As you know, that it's not only the problem for Bangladesh, it's a regional problem, regional crisis, as well as the international crisis as well, as we said that. So regarding that perspective, what Australia can offer to resolve this problem, and especially as we are focusing on the repatriation. So elaborate your passion or cooperation with us in terms of diplomatic and international platforms.
Sure. And this is a very significant regional issue, regional and global issue.
Right.
I think in terms of I'll talk a little bit later about our support for the response to the Rohingya crisis, but I think it's important at the outset to acknowledge the very positive role that the Bangladeshi people and government have performed and continue to perform in terms of welcoming and supporting the Rohingya who have been forced from their homeland. It's Bangladesh is the most densely populated country in the world that's not a city.
Yeah.
And so the migration of a large number of people can affect the communities. And Bangladesh has stood by its I guess the common humanity, but also the obligations in terms of providing support to people who are fleeing from Myanmar. So that's the first thing, is to acknowledge Bangladesh's role there. I think the second thing in terms of the repatriation question, I think, yes, repatriation is very important when the conditions are right. I mean, we are all watching very closely what is happening in Myanmar, and I think all parties would agree that the conditions are not currently conducive to the return or the repatriation of Rohingya, but certainly, and when we talk to Rohingya, they are very clear where their homeland is. So in terms of what Australia as a member of the international community and a member of the Indo-Pacific region, and what we focus on is using every lever at our disposal to hold the Myanmar government to account and to return to the path of democracy. I think in addition to that, our largest humanitarian program globally covers Myanmar and Bangladesh. We see it as very much a joint issue where we provide significant funding to the Rohingya crisis response. And that funding is sustained, and that supports things like food, education, shelter, and so on. In terms of the advocacy around this, is that we are adamant and take steps to ensure that this remains on the international agenda. We support the ASEAN 5-point consensus and call on all players to help move forward to a resolution of the conflict.
Thank you, Excellency. So now I would like to talk about the international crisis. As you know, that Ukraine-Russia war is ongoing. So Bangladesh is so far away from that war, but we are suffering in many ways. Like if I talk about the food security, if I talk about the energy issues. So what is your evaluation to mitigate these challenges?
So I think at the outset, words matter. And so for us, I'll just use a slightly, in this conversation, I'll use a slightly different phrase. We don't describe the war between Russia and Ukraine. We refer to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And that's a very particular point as to where the root causes of this conflict and its consequences lie. They lie with Russia's invasion. In terms of the assistance that we can offer, I think, as you rightly said, this is having global impacts. Australia remains a strong trading partner of Bangladesh and hopes to raise that in the future. But really, in terms of any kind of resolution, then that is something that is very much in the hands of one country there.
Thank you, Excellency, and we just wanted to know many more things from you, but right now I have to take a break, and after that we will talk about the cricket, we will talk about the climate issues, and we will definitely talk about our shared partnership, of course. Thank you so much, Excellency. So, ladies and gentlemen, what an exciting conversation so far. We have uncovered some amazing ideas about the future of Australia-Bangladesh relationships. But right now we have to take a break. Stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again, and today it's a privilege of hosting Her Excellency Nadia Simpson, Acting High Commissioner, Australian High Commissioner in Bangladesh. Welcome once again, Excellency. And as we talked about a lot, and before the break we just promised to talk about the cricket. You know that it's how important it is and how enthusiastic it is to talk about when we discuss about cricket. You know that we have lots of fan here in Bangladesh, and once upon a time I was a big fan of Australian cricket also. You know, cricket has been a strong cultural bridge between our two nations. So how can we use sports diplomacy especially to further enhance our bilateral relationships?
Okay, that's a I think Bangladeshi's love of cricket is really well known, but one of the things that I had the privilege of here in Bangladesh is watching the way in which Bangladeshis follow the football World Cup.
Yeah.
So the Brazil-Argentina rivalry and what was going on in the community at that time was really something to watch. And I think the reason I raise that is that Bangladeshis have, this is my view, a bit like Australians. Bangladeshis love particular sports, like Australians, but we also love all sports.
Oh.
And I think that is testament to the, it's very evident when you watch the way in which Bangladeshis follow the Football World Cup. So I think in terms of sports diplomacy, the next step in sports diplomacy is to genuinely move to sports diplomacy, to move beyond cricket. If I'm allowed to say that. Yeah. I think cricket's a fantastic sport, but there are also other sports in which we can engage.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed here, and I had the privilege of watching some really young girls, so under 11 squash championship.
Yeah.
And looking at how fast and agile these young players are, I think sports diplomacy, we need to move beyond looking at those very lucrative sports to a more participatory level of sports. What sports do communities play? Not just what sports are on the television. And so, like I mentioned, sort of seeing the sport of squash here and how much that's how committed people are to that sport is one thing, but there would certainly be other sports that we could engage in. I think one of the great things about Bangladesh and Australia is that we both have a love of swimming and water culture, like water sport activities is something that we can possibly share as well. But yes, so the answer to sports diplomacy would be keeping cricket. I'm not going to argue that cricket is not like the pillar of sports diplomacy in Bangladesh, but to also hang a few more sports off it.
That will be great. Thank you, Excellency. So now we'll talk about the climate change impact. Sure. And Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable country. So regarding that perspective, with increasing focus on climate resilience, renewable energy and sustainable development, of course, what new initiatives of partnerships can be anticipated between Bangladesh and Australia to address these global challenges?
Yeah. Climate change is such an important global issue. And from the Australian government's perspective, it's very much action on climate is something that's very much a priority for Australia. And when we look at engaging with countries like Bangladesh, I think the most important thing is to say that through our development assistance program is that climate is a cross-cutting theme. It's climate and gender are cross-cutting themes in everything we do. So we don't currently have a standalone climate program that focuses on this, but it's cross-cutting through all our activities. I think in terms of new initiatives, when we think about growing trade and investment links, would be to focus on renewable energy and renewable technologies. I think this is an area where, as a country like Bangladesh grows, and it's already a very large country with very high ambitions in terms of economic growth, transitioning towards clean energy technologies is really crucial. So that's an area where we can sort of look at further collaboration. We are already investing through the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research on things like crop diversification, or so that particular organisation looks at scientific research. So they'll look at ensuring that crops are climate resilient. And that's also an area of important cooperation and collaboration between our countries.
That's great. And right now I would like to talk about the media reformation and
Sure.
how important it is. And as a media people, so I have lots of things to know from you as well, Excellency. So do you have any comments about the media reform, as we talked about the different kind of reformation here in Bangladesh? So as once upon a time we talked about the media freedom. So now we are talking about the media reform. So what is your evaluation regarding that perspective?
That's a really very important but also very challenging question. And the reason I say it's challenging is that when I look back on on my experiences and coming from Australia is that we have a very robust media, and we have very robust media freedom rules, but also media standards as well as freedoms. So it's not just that you can say whatever you want. There's also media standards. And so then looking at the Bangladesh context, I think the foremost important thing to focus on, I think this also goes to the sort of those institutional reforms, is what institutions need to be in place that ensure that there is freedom of debate and freedom of political communication. And it's that first step of acknowledging, of any country acknowledging that media freedom is essential for a functioning democracy. And it also means that sometimes people will be offended. Sometimes you'll disagree. And that sometimes I'll be watching a particular news program in Australia. So there's obviously different news outlets might have different political leanings, and I might be listening to something and I'll really be annoyed at something that the newsreader says. But my response is always, they have the right to say that.
Yes.
And I think if you're in a situation where you're not from time to time upset with something that someone says in the media, then that should be a concern, because you should have debate, you should be tested, the media should be trying to push ideas, and the correct way or the appropriate way to respond to that is to embrace that and to say that sometimes statements might make you feel uncomfortable, but as a society things are important. The media performs a very critical function, and that function, I think it's you yourself are saying that I guess the people and the government are moving more towards focusing on reforms rather than freedom.
Right.
And it's that institutionalization and that recognition of the critical role that media plays that will provide, I guess, the bedrock to sustainable and enduring reforms. That, like I said, the interim government has made it very clear that they have a strong focus on human rights and freedom of expression, of which the media performs a very critical role.
But do you have any particular initiative to make it more influential?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think I'm not a media expert, and so I think from my perspective, the critical thing would be for the people of Bangladesh to be open to understanding what best practice looks like.
Yeah.
So I think it's that as with any government, you often look to your neighbouring countries, or you look to regional leaders or global best practice to say, look, what does best practice look like?
Right.
And so I think it would be that question of those that are in decision-making powers within those that have decision-making powers within Bangladesh, is to look and see, look, what is the best model to look at? And I'm not an expert in this, so I don't want to put forward a particular model, except to say that to reinforce that media freedom, media responsibility, and the institutionalization of the importance of media in a democracy are really critical.
Thank you so much. As we talked about the Reformation, as you know, the interim government in Bangladesh has initiated a number of significant Reformation areas. You know it very well. So regarding that perspective, do you have any offer or strategic partner opinion about the Reformation?
I think, as I keep coming back to within this interview, is that any kind of change has to be led by the people of Bangladesh and by all the key stakeholders, whether they be civil society organisations, political parties, trade unions, any other kind of group that needs a place at the table. So in terms of that, I don't have any suggestions on reforms, except for the fact that, as the government has recognised here, as the interim government has recognised, for reforms to be embedded, they need to be embraced by a range of stakeholders.
Given our shared values within IORA, the Commonwealth and the UN, what opportunities do you see for Bangladesh to leverage this platform for mutual benefits with Australia?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think at the outset, since a lot of these multilateral forums, the key engagement points are through diplomats. I think now's an appropriate time to sort of acknowledge the strength of the Bangladeshi diplomatic service. I think as a relatively smaller or middle country, I think Bangladesh punches well above its weight in terms of engaging within these institutions and organisations. And I've had the privilege of working with Bangladesh, particularly around IORA. We had a high-level visit from our Assistant Foreign Minister Watts came to Bangladesh to attend IORA. And so I think in terms of those areas of mutual benefit, I guess from my perspective, Australia's near region extends to the Bay of Bengal. So that's what we consider our near region. And so as a partner in the near region, I think from the Australian and Bangladeshi perspective, is that what we can bring to those multilateral forums is that regional perspective, is that focus on the shared peace and prosperity in this region, in we would say the Indo-Pacific region, but from a Bangladesh perspective, you often talk about the Indian Ocean region. And I think being a voice for that region is something that we can work on and collaborate.
Thank you, Excellency. So it's my last question to you, that do you have any message for Bangladeshi people so that they can make their Bangladesh beautiful once again?
Wow. In terms of a message for the Bangladeshi people, I think the first and foremost is to say that Australia stands with you. You know, we are a close friend. We're from the same region, and we're here. Yeah. I think the second message that I would like to share with the Bangladeshi people would be around what has struck me during my 3.5 years here has been the passion, the creativity, the resilience, but also the openness of Bangladeshi people and the Bangladeshi society in terms of having a very strong regional and global outlook. Building relationships across a range of institutions and organisations, and having a very firm focus on developing and maintaining strong people-to-people links. So, in summary, we're here with you, and we look forward to looking at the new Bangladesh as it makes its way to the future.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us on Opinion.